This is the Auld Kirk at the beginning of the 21st century. Over the years since its founding it has had many appearances. When it was first established sometime in the early days of Christian mission, the whole area was very different, probably heavily wooded and undrained. The first church or its successors would have been of turf and thatched, like most buildings of the period. We can only guess at their appearance, but in David I's early days on the throne of Scotland a change was on the way. David had spent much of his early life at the Norman court in England, and he established the feudal system here and began to build stone churches and abbeys, not merely because he was a Christian, but for the practical reason that church and state were mutually supportive. Castles were likewise built in stone and occupied by barons who ruled from them and swore fealty to the king. David's church here, founded in 1127, predated both Kilwinning and Paisley Abbeys, and while much of it still exists, it is obscured by later additions, of which there are 6. Let us walk round it and note the additions. As we enter the gate, we may be able to note that the original fabric was built with an east-west orientation. This is a plan that the Christian church has followed in all its branches after the description of the tabernacle of Moses in the wilderness and of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. What we see in front of us is, on our right, the last extension on the north of the building, paradoxically the second youngest at a mere 100 years old, completed in 1905. On our left is the gable of the crocodile, and the date of its erection is still clear above the window. It is 1642, and this is the first intimation that the visitor gains that this is one of the most interesting and ambitious parts of this ancient fabric. As we go round the northeast corner we get a sight of the gable of the original church, onto which a small porch was grafted in 1853. Continuing in the same direction, we come to the first extension, built 37 years after the Reformation, in 1597. The reason for this building is unclear, for it was not a burial vault, such things having been forbidden by the Reformers. The builder was James Cunningham of Glengarnock Castle, and both names are used in reference to it. The Cunninghams of Glencairn were strong supporters of the Reform movement, and their coat of arms is incised with the date above the windows. Next to that stands the organ chamber, built in 1910, which is the last extension. Round the next corner, on the west gable, we find the bell tower. Built in 1490, it has a fascinating history of its own. The bell it contains was donated by Malcolm Browne, the minister, in 1753, and cast by Johannes Milne, a canon founder in Edinburgh. The ground floor was originally a prison cell, dating to the time of its building, when the church was more deeply involved in the judicial and executive power of the land, before the function was taken from it and placed in the hands of specialists and independent lawyers. It was common for prisoners to undergo public humiliation as the worshippers left the church. The prisoner was secured to the wall by the jugs or collar of iron, which hung beside the cell window. The instrument of punishment has long been gone, but its location can be seen, pointing to a part of the Kirk's function in administering what was called justice in those days. The junction of the bell tower to the original gable is clearly seen beside the door to the tower. We enter by the west door in the bell tower and find ourselves in the midst of living history. The place where we now stand permits a look along the entire nave, the original ground plan of the church of 1127. We tend to think of the church as being rebuilt in 1470, but it is a great deal more likely that rebuilding will be more concerned with the roof than the walls, for decay is more prone to occur in the wooden roof than in the stone parts, and no amount of excavation has shown any other foundations. After all, ruins like the border abbeys are intact in their lower stonework, and they are of the same date. We can be safe in saying that this area has known the worship of God for over 900 years. The length is just over 60 feet, and the breadth some 35. A simple rectangle. Ignore for the time being the missing side walls and the obviously later additions. This will be made clear as we move around. As we move down the central aisle towards the dais, we can look to the right and see the first extension to the original plan. This is the Cunningham or Glengarnock aisle, built in 1597, as we noted on the outside. We look at the east gable, and immediately in front of this stood the high altar in pre-Reformation times, possibly even the baptismal font, although sometimes this was located at the west door. It was discovered that the original door was not at the west, but on the north wall, roughly where the westernmost pillar is now sited. Since the Reformers abhorred any of the trappings of the Roman form of worship, the east end would be changed out of recognition. The altar would be removed, and the font, if it bore carved representations of the crucifixion. The communion table became the central feature in its place. The arch on the right before the removal of the stones is where there could have been the sedilia, the group of 3 seats for the officiating clergy at the celebration of the Mass, and the piscina for washing the sacred vessels. We can only guess. The pulpit occupies its original place, as dictated by the primary position of the altar, which was the focus of worship in the Roman tradition. After the Reformation in 1560, the teaching and preaching of the Word became central to worship, and the focus shifted to the pulpit and communion table. 2 sacraments were all that were recognized. Baptism had been administered to Jesus and instructed by him, as recorded in Matthew 28, and he had instituted the sacrament of Holy Communion at the Last Supper in the upper room on the night he was betrayed. The pulpit carries the baptismal font, this being required by the First Book of Discipline in 1561. This pewter vessel is likely to be our oldest artefact. The pulpit probably belongs to about the beginning of the 17th century. Note the brackets which support the bookboard. All the faces are different from each other, a reminder that the gospel should be preached to every creature. Above the pulpit is a sounding board, and it is full of allegory, and contains many sermons in itself. The angel of the Annunciation dominates the centre. Other features can be seen, such as the green man, originally a pagan symbol of fertility, introduced by the Romans and absorbed into the Christian faith as a symbol of regeneration and rebirth. The winged heads before the Reformation were portrayed as skulls, symbolical of death, but after it as fully fleshed, symbolical of the resurrection. There are many more images to be found here. Facing the pulpit is the magnificent Crawford Gallery. This is the interior of the gable we noticed outside, dated 1662. This is more complex than it appears, for underneath the level of the floor is a burial vault, and behind the gallery is what was once a kitchen and retiring room. Diets of worship were long, and the laird's family would have had dinner there after the morning service, probably returning for another service later. John Crawford, the Laird of Kilbirnie, was knighted by King Charles at a time when the king was seeking support. The gallery was built of oak to commemorate the honour, and there is a strong belief that carvers were brought from the continent to do the work, for the idiom of the carving suggests that the work was indeed foreign. The laird and his family and guests occupied the front seats, with the senior members of his domestic staff behind. On the left side can be seen a painted figure referred to as the Jewish legislator. At one time the picture was balanced by another on the opposite side, but it crumbled away at some time, and the place it occupied has a reference carved on it to a partial restoration carried out by Sir James Knox. Beside the beautiful Crawford Gallery, the ladle and pew was erected against the north wall. It was erected by the owner of that barony in 1671. He was Captain William Hamilton. His coat of arms, impaled with that of his wife's father, is on the back wall of the pew. That detail shows his wife to be Janet Brisbane of Bishopton. Their initials are included in the decoration along with the date. Sir John Crawford, the grandson of the first Sir John, was an active politician, and he was elevated to the rank of the 1st Viscount Garnet. In celebration of this favour he had the arms of his ancestors put up in front of his grandfather's gallery in 1705. His arms are in the centre, with his mother's side to the viewer's left, his father's on the right. High above in the corners, his arms are again impaled with those of his wife's father. He was the first Earl of Bute. This device is some 4 feet high. The reason for the use of the father-in-law's arms is simply that women seldom have a coat of arms in their own right. That was a male preserve, as men were expected to go to war while women were not. That was the last important alteration to the fabric of the building until the middle of the 19th century. Society had changed with the advent of the agricultural and industrial revolutions. The Knox family had established the beginnings of the textile industry in the town at the end of the 18th century. By the middle of the 19th century, many strands of history came together. The ironworks were built, and the railway came to the valley. The potato famine also brought an influx of people seeking work. It was such a dynamic series of events that led to the doubling of the population of the town in a mere decade. Space in the church was required, and at this point it might have meant that the church be demolished and erected half a mile away, as was proposed, close to the new town. Financial implications won the day, and a programme of alterations was set in place. The old gallery was extended and a wooden floor inserted for the first time with pews, and the little east porch was built. The pulpit was logically moved so that the preacher could speak the length of the church. It was sited on the east gable wall. By the 90s the decision was taken that funds must be raised for an extension, and wisely this was done before any work was undertaken. By the time that enough was collected by means of sales of work and other devices, an architect had been engaged. He was Charles Stuart Still Johnson, born in Orkney, but now living in Edinburgh. He had built up a reputation for church building. The only place available was on the north side, where burials had never taken place. His solution to the problem was a work of genius, as may be seen by close examination. It entailed the removal of the north wall in its entirety, from the side of the Crawford aisle to the line of the west gable. The 3 pillars replaced the wall and bear the gallery and the roof. The outside stair to the Crawford Gallery had to be turned through 90 degrees to lie parallel to the aisle, in order to clear the ground space for the new work. 3 pillars support first the new gallery. They appear to be of oak, but in fact they are of cast iron clad in oak sheathing. This has been so skillfully done that the joints are undetectable. From the new gallery level we can clearly see the cast iron nature of the pillars and how the roof timbers are socketed in. The structure is called a roof tree and its name is very descriptive. While we are here, it is interesting to note that Charles Johnson has designed that this tusk of stone be left to indicate the line of the demolished north wall. The estimate for the work came to a total of £1,083, 5 shillings, 10.5 pence, and the tradespeople were all local. That was in 1902, and when the final settlement was made, the original estimate was still unchanged. The Laidland pew was resited from the north wall, now demolished, to the east gable, and the pulpit returned to its original place, which was more suitable in any case, as facing the majority of the congregation. Before the new extension was completed, the minister, the Reverend Henry Buchan, proposed that anyone who wished in the congregation could commemorate his family by paying for a plaque. This is the result. The 20 plaques were designed by the architect and carved by the firm of John Fisher of Glasgow. Many of the descendants of the donors of the plaques still worship in the church a century later. The architect's panel is adjoining the Crawford Gallery and indicates his status as Grand Architect in Scottish Freemasonry. Charles Johnson was recalled to design the organ chamber, and this was built in 1910 and the organ installed the following year. That was the final change made in the ground plan. Let us look at our stained glass. All but 4 windows in the church are of stained glass. These windows are the oldest, having been inserted about 1896 in memory of William Cochrane Jemison of Ladeside and his wife Janet Walker. The designer is unknown. The plants and fruits shown all have biblical connections. Immediately beside it, this small window is by Guthrie and Wells and commemorates the Girls Guildry who were active in the church in the middle years of last century. These 3 windows were put in 1926 to the memory of Bryce Muir Knox of Red Hugh by his widow. As well as being of the manufacturing family, he was an elder of the Kirk. James Ballantyne, FSA, was the designer, and the arms shown are those of the head of the family. The Second World War of 1939-45 is remembered by this window, unveiled in 1948. The designer was Sidney Holmes, and the work by Guthrie and Wells. The text which surrounds it is from Zechariah 4, verse 6. There is a Crusader suggestion in the details of the picture, referring to the ancient gravestone in the churchyard, reputed to be of Crusaders. Gordon Webster designed and executed this window in memory of Reverend C.C. Pitcairn Hill and former incumbents. It was unveiled in 1959. The 2 windows in the north wall should be looked at in conjunction with the painting. The significance is immediately clear. They form the Trinity, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. The oil painting represents the Father and is the work of Mr. Liam Tracy, a modern Irish artist. The paschal lamb for the Son came from the former Glengarnock Church, which united with the Barony Church to form the Auld Kirk in 1978. The saltire flag carried by the Lamb was originally the Cross of St. George. The window was to the memory of the brothers Kerr who established the Auchengree foundry. The Holy Spirit, represented by the dove, is shown on the right-hand window. It is the work of Arthur Spears on the occasion of the 500th anniversary of the present building. James Crawford, a local builder, was responsible for the mason work of the north extension under the direction of Charles Johnson, and the windows in the new gallery are dedicated to his memory. The figure is St. Brendan, abbot of Clonfertin, Ireland, the great traveller and missionary. This foundation was dedicated to the saint, and the town which has sprung up around it has become Kilbirnie, the cell or church of Brendan. The text on the upper window comes from Ephesians 4 verse 15, speaking the truth in love. We turn our attention to the memorial plaques. Here lies Thomas Crawford of Jordan Hill, sixth son to Lawrence Crawford of Kilbirnie and Janet Kerr, his spouse, eldest daughter to Robert Kerr of Kersland, 1594. This was replicated from the panel on the wall of the little mausoleum just outside the church wall in 1929. It would have destroyed the originality of the plaque if it had been recarved. Note that the date shown is 1594. Thomas died on January 3rd, 1603, so he must have looked on his burial place for many years before he filled it. The actual burial vault lies on the north side, not under it. Thomas's story is an active one, for he was a relative of the husband of Mary, Queen of Scots, and one of his active supporters. His most daring escapade was the capture of Dumbarton Castle under cover of darkness on the 1st of April, 1571, when he led a party which scaled the rock at its highest point. This was 3 years after Mary had fled from the Battle of Langside into captivity in England. The effigies of Thomas and his wife lie inside the mausoleum. Under the west end of the Crawford Gallery is this list of all the known incumbents in the church. Many early names are missing, and the earliest shown is Dom Guglielmo de Pasaletto, Perpetua Vicario Ecclesiae de Kilbirnie, William of Paisley, Vicar of Kilbirnie. This gives a date of 1361, 6.5 centuries ago. It is worth noting that this list shows Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, and again Presbyterian ministers of the Gospel. This memorial to members of Glengarnock Church who died in both wars was inserted here at the Union of the Churches in 1978. This imposing parish war memorial was a heavy financial burden, accepted at a time when there were plenty of other burdens laid on the congregation. The war had caused a drop in the income of the church, and the demands made on income by deserving causes at home and abroad were heavy. It was not until 1923 that the memorial became a reality. It was the work of the bead cabinet-making firm of Stevenson and Higgins. The dedication ceremony was conducted by Dr. White of Glasgow Barony Church. The Jemison family came to Kilbirnie from Penrith in the early years of the 19th century as coal owners and later as thread manufacturers. They were involved in the Honourable East India Company and the Indian Army. The monument shown here is in memory of the son whose death in an ambush in the South African War brought the line to an end. He served as a lieutenant in the Border Regiment. This panel is a link with the emerging science of aerial survey, for the man remembered here died in the course of a survey in Africa. He was the eldest son of Sir Neil Kennedy Cochrane Patrick of Ladyland. When the organ chamber was built, it was made to span the graves of several members of the Houston family by means of an arch which did not disturb the layers, nor did it include them within the ground plan of the church. The Swindridge Muir Memorial. This memorial is the last of its type to be erected in the church. The reason for its position here is territorial, as Sir Charles Crawford was the 4th Baronet of Kilbirnie. The design of the panel was by MacNeil Brothers, cabinet makers of Lochwinnoch, and the carving was the work of Mr. McConnell, also of Lochwinnoch, who was responsible for carving many items in the National War Memorial in Edinburgh Castle. It was unveiled on Sunday the 18th of May 1941. Visitors to the church cannot fail to see the magnificent display of coats of arms on the front of the Crawford Gallery, showing Viscount Crawford's descent from many notable Scottish families. It may come as a surprise that there are no fewer than 36 heraldic devices in or on the building. Heraldry is a complicated science and will not be dealt with here for its peculiar vocabulary and rules, but we hope to deal with it later in detail in a separate DVD. We have had a long succession of ministers, and it is fitting that the Reverend Ian W. Benzie, the present incumbent, should conclude.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your inspiration, your commentary, and also for your book, Kilbirnie Auld Kirk, A History. There is, however, no substitute for a personal visit to the Auld Kirk, for that is an experience with no equal. To worship within these venerable walls, blessed with centuries of prayer and of exposition, is something unique too, and you would be made most welcome if you could ever come along to meet with us and to worship with us in friendship and in love. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Amen.
This is the Kilbirnie Auld Kirk at the beginning of the 21st century. Over the years since its founding it has had many appearances. When it was first established sometime in the early days of Christian mission, the whole area was very different, probably heavy wooded and undrained. The first church of its successors would have been of turf and thatched, like most buildings of the period. We can only guess at their appearance, but in David I's early days on the throne of Scotland a change was on the way. David spent much of his early life at the Norman court in England, and he established a feudal system here and began to build stone churches and abbeys, not merely because he was Christian, but for the practical reason church and state were mutually supportive. Castles were likewise built in stone and occupied by barons who ruled from them and swore fealty to the king. David's church here, founded in 1127, predated both the Winning and Paley abbeys. While much of it still exists, it is obscured by later additions, of which there are 6. Let us walk round it and note the additions. As we enter the gate, we may be able to note that the original fabric was built with an east-west orientation. This is a plan that the Christian church followed all its branches after the description of the tabernacle of Moses in the wilderness and of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. What we see in front of us is, on our right, the last extension on the north of the building, paradoxically the second youngest, a mere 100 years old, completed in 1905. On our left is the gable of the Crawford Hall, and the date of its erection is still clear, above the window. It is 1642. This is the first intimation that the visitor gains that this is one of the most interesting and ambitious parts of this ancient fabric. As we go round the northeast corner we get a sight of the gable of the original church, onto which a small porch was grafted in 1853. Continuing in the same direction, we come to the first extension, built 37 years after the Reformation, in 1597. The reason for this building is unclear, for it was not a burial vault, such things having been forbidden by the Reformer. The builder was James Cunningham of Glengarnock Castle, and both names are used in reference to it. The Cunninghams of Glencairn were strong supporters of the Reform movement, and their coat of arms is incised at the date of the windows. Next to that stands the organ chamber, built in 1910, which is the last extension. Round the next corner, on the west gable we find the bell tower. Built in 1490, it has a fascinating history of its own. The bell it contains was donated by Malcolm Brown, minister in 1753, and cast by Johannes Milne, a cannon founder in Edinburgh. The ground floor was originally a prison cell, dating to the time of its building when the church was more deeply involved in the judicial and executive power of the land, before the function was taken from it, placed in the hands of specialists and independent lawyers. It was common for prisoners to undergo public humiliation as worshippers left the church. The prisoner was secured to the wall with a jugs or collar of iron, which hung beside the cell window. The instrument of punishment has long been gone, but its location can be seen, pointing to a part of the Kirk function in administering what was called justice in those days. The junction of the bell tower to the original gable is clearly seen beside the door to the tower. We enter the west door in the bell tower and find ourselves in the midst of living history. The place where we now stand permits a look along the entire nave, the original ground plan of the church of 1127. We tend to think of the church as being rebuilt in 1470, but it is a great deal more likely that rebuilding will be more concerned with the roof and the walls, for decay is more prone to occur in the wooden roof than in stone pots, and no amount of excavation has shown any other foundations. After all, ruins like the border abbeys are intact in the lower stonework, and they are of the same date. We can be safe in saying that this area has known the worship of God for over 900 years. The length is just over 60 feet, and the breadth some 35, a simple rectangle. Ignore for the time being the missing side walls and the obviously later additions. This will be made clear as we move around. As we move down the central aisle towards the dais, we can look to the right and see the first extension to the original plan. This is the Cunningham or Glengarnock aisle, built in 1597, as we noted on the outside. We look at the east gable, and immediately in front of this stood high altar in pre-Reformation times, possibly even the baptismal font, although sometimes this was located at the west door. It was discovered that the original door was not at the west, but on the north wall, roughly where the westernmost pillar is now sited. Since the Reformers abhorred any of the trappings of Roman form of worship, the east end would be changed out of recognition. The altar would be removed, and the font bore carved representation of the crucifixion. The communion table became the central feature in its place. The arch on the right before the removal of the stones is where there could have been the celia, the group of 3 seats of the officiating clergy at the celebration of the Mass, and piscina for washing sacred vessels. We can only guess. The pulpit occupies its original place, as dictated by the primary position of the altar, which was the focus of worship in the Roman tradition. After the Reformation in 1560, the teaching and preaching of the Word came central to worship, and the focus shifted to the pulpit and communion table. 2 sacraments were all that were recognised. Baptism had been administered to Jesus and instructed by him, as recorded in Matthew 28, and he had instituted the sacrament of Holy Communion at the Last Supper in the upper room on the night he was betrayed. The pulpit carries the baptismal font, this being required by the First Book of Discipline in 1561. This pewter vessel is likely to be our oldest artifact. The pulpit probably belongs to the beginning of the 17th century. Note brackets which support the bookboard. All the faces are different from each other. Are mind that the gospel should be preached to every creature. Above the pulpit is a sounding board, and it is full of allegory, and contains many sermons in itself. The angel of the Annunciation dominates the centre. Other features can be seen, such as the green man, originally a pagan symbol of fertility, introduced by the Romans and absorbed into the Christian faith, as a symbol of regeneration and rebirth. The winged heads before the Reformation were portrayed as skulls, symbolical of death, but after it's fully fleshed, symbolical of the resurrection. There are many more images to be found here. Facing the pulpit is a magnificent Crawford gallery,